Be agreed to.
Speaker.
David Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak to the third reading of this bill, which we will oppose. We have had this bill characterised correctly as picking the pockets of the paper boys and paper girls around the country. And, Mr. Speaker, I think that has resonated with the wider public. They are realising that this budget offers very little for ordinary New Zealanders who are feeling the squeeze. And now we have this kind of legislation going through, which really is plugging the odd gap here or there, and that's at best, Mr. Speaker. We certainly have seen that in the case of the changes to the student loan repayment scheme, where the government is swallowing a rat, and far from being a flip-flop, it's so fast, the change, it's been described simply as a flop. This bill, as Mr. Dunn has said, takes the money from low-earning children. It also does some changes to the election to leave herd valuation scheme as it is, and that is a good change. That's a positive change that the Labour Party first mooted, and it's good to see National following through on that. And Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid, though, there's little else to say about this bill that isn't a criticism, because it really is tinkering. It's tinkering at the edges, and after a very short time into their second term, this National Government is reduced to that. There is no bright vision in this particular tax bill. The tax side, the Minister of Finance said this morning that he believes that spending is under control on the government side, but that the revenue side is uncertain. This is an attempt to get that under control. We know that revenue has dropped from 35% of GDP down to 31% in the last couple of years as a result of changes that the government has made. And a good deal of that can be pinned back to the changes in the 2010 budget, which saw the wealthiest 10% of New Zealanders get 44% of the value of those tax changes, and the bottom 20% get just 2% of the value of those tax changes. And that was designed, we are told, to stimulate the economy. Well, we know now that it was not revenue neutral, because the economy has not been stimulated by that. When the wealthiest people get their tax rebate, their tax back, they tend to go on holidays, they tend to put it in savings. It does not stimulate the economy in the way that tax cuts for lower income earners do. And this here we see as a broadening of that, Mr. Speaker, taking the money off low-income children who are perhaps working as cleaners after school, perhaps they're working as paper boys or paper girls or pamphlet deliverers. Mr. Speaker, these are not the people we should be pursuing. This is not the budget of pro-growth, free enterprise. This is the budget of tinkering, and this is a bill that backs that particular agenda up. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken in previous readings about the RIS, the Regulatory Impact Statement, and we learn in the Regulatory Impact Statement that in terms of the 68,000 children affected by the changes that will see money taken out of the pockets of paper boys and paper girls, couriers and cleaners, that businesses are likely to have an extra overhead. And I think this is a point that it just underscores the hopelessness of this measure, because this particular bill not only goes around chasing those who are earning below $2,340 a year, but it then puts an extra overhead on businesses having to collect that. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And this increase in compliance costs just shows where the National Government has got to. It's now making businesses pick the pockets of boys and girls around the country. It's a tragedy. Now, the other thing that I noted in the RIS, which I just haven't had an opportunity to mention until now, is that it also hasn't been consulted on yet, because this is such an urgent measure for the government to get through. We've put it under urgency. It can't even estimate the additional compliance on business, and I just don't think this can be best practice, Mr. Speaker. The businesses carry this extra overhead, and they don't even have an opportunity to express their discontent or suggest a more sensible way of doing it. And there's another point that falls out of this, which is that it effectively encourages the grey economy. because those employers that collect pay as you earn will be encouraged to do so. They'll be encouraged to tax those low-income kids around the country. And those ones which don't do pay as you earn, the people mowing lawns next door or babysitting and so on who receive cash, are not taxed, Mr. Speaker. For a government that talks about going after those areas of the grey economy, this is actually just completely the opposite. It's just unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. So we have in front of us a bill that is not only ludicrous in its intent, but it also imposes an extra cost on business. This is so far from pro-growth policy, we couldn't get much further, Mr. Speaker. I'll touch briefly on the effect on students. We heard Ms Upston crying out in protest. Mrs Upston, my apologies, Mrs Upston. She wants, and I must get her name right because we've got a quote coming up from her. This is three years ago. She described the changes being made in this bill, and she said, "This bill is a significant step to encourage student loan repayment and, more importantly, to reduce the overall repayment times. The message very clearly is that our young people will be debt-free sooner." Who said that? It was Mrs Upston. Mrs Upston said that. Yes, just 3 years ago. And now this bill is repealing exactly that action which she was saying 3 years ago was a good idea. So this is the other thing we're doing in this bill, Mr. Speaker. We are repairing the mistakes of this government. And it's kind of crazy. So here we have not only extra costs to employers, we have picking the pockets of our children, but we also have flip-flops, Mr. Speaker. We have flip-flops. So the only thing that we can say apart from this is that it's wider tinkering. And this fits with the wider government tax program, Mr. Speaker. We have a tax program that's been announced at the beginning of the year which shows tightening up loopholes and trying to make sure that there are no exemptions here or there. This in fact encourages them in some ways, as I've noted. And those goals of that tax program are worthy. There is no doubt that we need a robust tax system. Every country needs one. Every Western country has one. But, Mr. Speaker, we need pro-growth tax policies. We actually need big changes if we're going to change the way our economy is structured. If we're going to support our exporters, if we're going to grow the economy, if we're going to afford to give our people the skills and training that will take New Zealand ahead, we need proper pro-growth tax policies. And this government, instead of doing that, is tinkering. It's urgently putting through measures to pick the pockets of boys and girls of this country. That is not proper base broadening. That is not vision. That is a backward step. So, Mr. Speaker, if we are wishing to see a brighter future that has been promised us, we are going to need to change the government. It's becoming more and more apparent because there is no plan. There is no plan. There is only tinkering. And at the moment we know 50,000 people a year are leaving for Australia. This bill is not going to help that. If the paper boys and paper girls can save up enough of their money after tax, they might be able to buy a ticket to get out of here. Maybe it is slowing them down because they're the only ones the government can slow down from leaving the country. If these policies are light at the end of the tunnel, as perhaps they've been described by some, I think it's not really light at the end of the tunnel. It is in fact a train coming in the opposite direction, Mr. Speaker.
Todd McClay.
Thank you. I want to only take a brief call on this debate. But can I start by saying to the last speaker,